Marcus. The voice cut through the howling wind like a blade through silk, clear and unmistakably human. Marcus Dalton froze in the barn doorway, his lantern casting wild shadows across the hay-strewn floor. The storm outside raged with biblical fury, but inside the barn, everything had gone dead silent, everything except the horse. The black stallion stood in the far stall, its intelligent eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Steam rose from its midnight coat, and when it spoke again, its voice was that of a man Marcus had thought buried 6 months ago. "You look surprised to see me, brother." Marcus's lantern slipped from nerveless fingers, crashing to the floor and plunging half the barn into darkness. The remaining flame flickered against the stallion's coat, revealing something that shouldn't exist, a white scar running from the horse's left ear to its jaw, identical to the one Thomas Dalton had carried to his grave. "You're dead," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. "I watched them lower you into the ground." The horse's laugh was bitter, all too familiar. "Death's just another kind of prison, Marcus. And you should know all about prisons, shouldn't you?" Marcus stumbled backward, his mind reeling. 3 days ago, he'd bought this horse from a traveling trader for more money than he could afford, money he'd borrowed against the ranch that was already failing. The trader had seemed eager to be rid of the animal, claiming it was cursed, that strange things happened wherever it went. Marcus had dismissed it as superstition. He'd needed a strong horse to work the land, to pull the plow through soil that grew harder and more stubborn each season. Since Thomas died in that mining accident, Marcus had been slowly drowning in debt, watching everything their father built crumble around him. Now, staring into eyes that held his dead brother's soul, Marcus understood why the trader had been so desperate to sell. The stallion moved closer, its hooves silent on the barn floor despite its massive size. "You want to know how I ended up like this, don't you, Marcus? You want to know what really happened in that mine?" Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the barn in stark white. In that frozen moment, Marcus saw something else in the horse's eyes, not just Thomas's familiar features, but pain so deep it seemed to echo from another world. "That mine collapse wasn't an accident," the stallion said, its voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. "And you know it." Marcus sank onto a hay bale, his legs unable to support him any longer. The truth he'd buried alongside his brother came rushing back like a flood breaking through a dam. "Thomas, you knew that mine was dangerous." The stallion's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You knew the timber was rotted, the supports were failing, but you let me go down there anyway, because you needed the silver to save the ranch." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd tried to forget that last conversation with Thomas, the way his brother's face had fallen when Marcus refused to co-sign the loan that would have kept them both from having to work the dangerous Widow's Peak mine. "I told you not to take that job," Marcus said desperately. "I begged you to find something else. After you made sure I had no choice." The stallion stepped closer, its breath warm against Marcus's face. "You could have sold the north pasture, could have asked Sarah's father for help, but your pride was worth more than my life, wasn't it?" Marcus buried his face in his hands. The truth was worse than Thomas knew. Marcus hadn't just failed to help his brother, he'd actively pushed him toward the mine. When Thomas had come to him with concerns about the safety conditions, Marcus had called him a coward. When Thomas had wanted to quit after the first cave-in, Marcus had reminded him of all the people depending on that silver money. "I was trying to save the ranch," Marcus whispered. "Everything Pa worked for. You were trying to save your conscience," Thomas replied, his voice softening slightly. "And look how that worked out. The ranch is still failing, isn't it? Still drowning in debt. And now you're talking to a dead man trapped in a horse's body." The storm outside seemed to be growing stronger, rattling the barn walls with increasing violence. Marcus looked up at his brother, at the creature his brother had become, and felt something break inside his chest. "What are you?" he asked. "Punishment," Thomas said simply. "For both of us." You have to live with what you did, and I have to watch you do it. The medicine man who sold me to that trader said it was justice, that souls bound by guilt can't rest until the debt is paid. A crash of thunder shook the barn so violently that dust rained from the rafters. In the distance, Marcus could hear something else, hoofbeats approaching through the storm. Someone's coming, he said, rising unsteadily to his feet. Thomas's ears pricked forward, listening. 3 riders, moving fast despite the weather. The stallion's voice took on an edge of warning. Marcus, there's something else you need to know about that mine accident. Something about who else wanted me dead. The hoofbeats were getting closer, and Marcus realized they were riding straight for the barn. The riders burst through the barn doors like avenging angels, their faces hidden beneath streaming rain slickers. Marcus recognized the lead horse before he saw the man, Sheriff Coleman's distinctive paint mare, her sides heaving from the hard ride through the storm. Marcus Dalton. Coleman's voice boomed through the barn as he dismounted, water streaming from his coat. Step away from that horse. Behind him came 2 deputies Marcus didn't recognize, both with their hands resting on their gun butts. Their eyes held the kind of grim determination that meant someone wasn't walking away from this encounter. Sheriff, Marcus tried to keep his voice steady, but he could hear the guilt creeping in. What's this about? That horse, Coleman said, pointing at Thomas with a gloved hand. Where did you get it? Marcus's mind raced. If he told the truth, that he'd bought it from a traveling trader, they'd want to know why he had money for horses when he couldn't pay his debts. If he lied, Thomas stepped forward, placing his massive body between Marcus and the lawman. When he spoke, his voice came out as the sound any horse might make, a low nickering that somehow managed to convey menace. But Marcus heard the words clearly. They're not here about the horse, brother. They're here about the mine. Sheriff Coleman's hand moved to his weapon. That animal's been linked to 3 deaths across 2 counties. Everywhere it goes, people start talking to thin air, claiming they hear voices. Then they confess to crimes that were supposed to stay buried. One of the deputies stepped closer, his young face pale with fear. In Millerville, a banker admitted to embezzling after spending 1 night in the same stable as that creature. In Red Creek, a store owner confessed to burning down his competitor's shop. Always the same story. They say the horse spoke to them. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. You think I'm going crazy? I think you're going to tell us what really happened to your brother, Coleman said quietly. Because that trader we caught up with, he had some interesting stories about where this horse came from. Said it appeared the same night Thomas died, walking out of the desert like it was coming home. The wind howled through the open barn doors, and in that sound Marcus could swear he heard other voices. The voices of men who'd taken their guilt to their graves, only to have it dragged back into the light by a black stallion with human eyes. There's more, Thomas whispered, his voice only audible to Marcus. The mine collapse wasn't random, and it wasn't just about silver. Someone wanted me dead, Marcus. Someone who knew I'd discovered what they were really mining down there. Sheriff Coleman drew his gun, the metal gleaming in the lamplight. Last chance, Dalton. The truth, or we take you in and let the judge sort it out. Marcus looked at the 3 armed men, then at the stallion who wore his brother's soul. The storm outside seemed to be waiting, holding its breath for his answer. The truth, Marcus said, his voice stronger than he felt. The truth is going to destroy more than just me. Then maybe it's time for some things to be destroyed, Thomas said, his voice carrying a gentleness that Marcus remembered from their childhood. Maybe that's the only way anything good can grow in this place again. Sheriff Coleman kept his gun trained on Marcus, but didn't advance. What are you talking about, Dalton? What aren't you telling us? Marcus looked into his brother's eyes. Truly looked, not just at the horse but at the soul trapped within. He saw pain there, yes, but also something else. Forgiveness maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Thomas discovered something in that mine, Marcus said slowly. Not silver, bones, human bones. Dozens of them. The deputies exchanged glances, but Coleman never wavered. Whose bones? Missing prospectors, drifters, men who'd come through town over the past 5 years and disappeared. Marcus felt the words tumbling out of him like water through a broken dam. Someone was using that mine as a burial ground, and Thomas figured out who. Thomas stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that he could feel the stallion's breath on his cheek. When the horse spoke, its voice was barely a whisper. "Tell them about Aldrich." The name hit the barn like a physical force. One of the young deputies actually took a step backward, his face going white. "Judge Aldrich." Marcus continued, the words tasting like poison. "He's been covering up murders for years, taking money to make inconvenient people disappear." Thomas found evidence, letters, payment records, a whole system of corruption that went all the way to the territorial capital. "That's impossible," Coleman said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Aldrich is a respected man, a pillar of the community, a pillar built on a foundation of corpses," Thomas said, though only Marcus could hear him. "And when I threatened to expose him, he made sure that mine collapsed with me in it." Marcus reached out slowly, his hand hovering just above Thomas's neck. "My brother was going to bring the evidence to you, Sheriff. The morning he died, he was planning to ride into town and tell you everything. But you stopped him," Coleman said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I convinced him to work one more day in the mine first, told him we needed the money." Marcus's hand finally made contact with Thomas's coat, and he felt a warmth there that no ordinary horse should possess. "I was scared of what would happen to us if he crossed Aldrich, scared of losing everything." Thomas turned his great head toward Marcus, and for a moment the stallion's expression was purely human, purely his brother's. "You didn't know Aldrich would try to kill me. You just wanted to protect what was ours, and I got you killed instead." Tears Marcus hadn't shed at the funeral finally came, hot and bitter against his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Thomas. God help me. I'm so sorry." The storm outside was beginning to fade, the thunder growing more distant. Sheriff Coleman slowly lowered his gun, his face troubled. "Where's this evidence now?" he asked quietly. Marcus looked at Thomas, who nodded slowly. "Hidden in the old well behind the house. Thomas put it there the night before he died, in case something happened to him." Sheriff Coleman and his deputies found the evidence exactly where Marcus said it would be, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in a metal box 20 feet down the old well. Letters in Judge Aldrich's handwriting, payment records, even photographs of some of the burial sites. Enough to hang a dozen men. The arrest came at dawn, just as the storm finally broke. Judge Aldrich tried to run, but there's nowhere to hide in territory where everyone knows your face. They found him at the train station with a satchel full of gold and a ticket to San Francisco. Marcus testified at the trial, telling the whole truth about his brother's discovery and his own cowardice. The judge who presided, brought in from the territorial capital, listened with grim attention as the full scope of the corruption was revealed. 12 men dead, their families never knowing what happened to them. A whole system of murder and cover-up that had operated for years. When it was over, when Aldrich had been sentenced to hang, and his conspirators locked away, Marcus returned to the failing ranch to find Thomas waiting in the barn. "Is it finished?" Marcus asked. The stallion nodded slowly. "The debt is paid, justice is done. The families of those dead men finally have their answers. And you, what happens to you now?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through the barn windows. "I don't know. Maybe I move on, maybe I stay. But the anger's gone, Marcus. The need for vengeance, that's something." Marcus approached slowly, his hand extended. This time Thomas didn't shy away when his brother's fingers found his neck. "I sold the ranch," Marcus said quietly. "Used the money to buy headstones for those murdered men. Proper burials, proper marker stones with their names. And you?" "I'm leaving, going east, maybe. Start over somewhere nobody knows the Dalton name." Marcus paused, studying his brother's face. "Unless would you come with me?" "If you can." Thomas considered this, his great head tilting thoughtfully. "I think," he said finally, "I'd like that. Been a long time since we went anywhere together." Years later, people in the Eastern Territories would tell stories about the man with the black stallion who helped solve cold cases and brought justice to forgotten crimes. They said the horse was uncanny smart, like it could read minds and smell lies. They said the man who rode it had eyes that looked like he'd seen too much sorrow, but had made his peace with it. What they didn't know was that sometimes, late at night when the moon was dark and the wind was still, the horse would speak in a human voice, and the two brothers would talk about forgiveness and the weight of choices made in fear. The last anyone saw of them, they were riding north toward Canada, silhouetted against a sunset that painted the sky the color of redemption. Behind them lay a trail of solved mysteries and grieving families finally given peace. Ahead lay whatever comes after justice is done, and debts are paid in full.